Welcome back to Development Book Club. Today we will conclude with I and Thou by Martin Buber. We will cover the third part today, and in the third part, Buber explicitly returns to the Buddha in certain parts of the last section. There's a lot of discussions of unity, and it's very cosmic and very densely philosophical. And he says, Buddha, the perfected and perfecter, asserts not. He refuses to claim that unity exists or does not exist, that he who has passed through all the trials of immersion will persist in unity after death, or that he will not persist in it. This refusal, his, quote, noble silence, unquote, and I put a cross-reference here to Hegel and Antigone, for those who have read about that. In Antigone's silence, there's a connection there. So this noble silence has been explained in two ways. Theoretically is the first way, because perfection is said to elude the categories of thought and assertion, and practically because the unveiling of such truths would not aid in salvation. Buber continues that in truth, both explanations belong together. Whoever treats being as the object of an assertion pulls it down into division and worldliness, into the antithesis of the it world, in which there is no salvation. Buber then quotes the Buddha, and this is weird because it's actually Kaufman translating Buber, who presumably is reading a text of the Buddha which has been translated from Pali into German. And then, so we go from Pali to German, German to English. So there's potential for odd translations here, and you'll hear what it sounds like. So Buber from the Buddha. When, O monk, the view prevails that soul and body are identical, there is no salvation. When, O monk, the view prevails that soul is one and body another, then there is also no salvation. Unquote. So in the envisaged mystery, Buber continues, even as in lived actuality, neither thus it is or thus it is not prevails, neither being nor not being, but rather thus and otherwise, being and not being, the indissoluble. Quite dense. Buber continues, and then there's another interesting set of translations that I think comes through here, which is, he says, the goal was for the Buddha the annulment of suffering. And annulment is not a word that we usually use in English when we are looking at the Buddhist text. So the annulment of suffering, which is to say the becoming and passing away, right? The wheel of samsara, right? Salvation from the wheel of rebirth. Quote, henceforth there is no recurrence. Sort of the goal of nirvana is, we talked about the 4 stages of enlightenment previously, where there's like a stream enterer, a once returner, a non-returner, and an arahant. And the idea is to not be reborn again. So there is no recurrence. Was to be the formula for those who had liberated themselves from the desire for existence and thus from the compulsion to become again ceaselessly. And just given that Walter Kaufmann is the translator here, Nietzsche is always on the mind. And this idea of the Buddha, the goal of nirvana being no recurrence, contrasting that with Nietzsche's sort of ethical test of eternal return, or amor fati, which is to say, like, this, I will continue reliving this moment for all of eternity. And that's a good thing. Can you say yes to that, is sort of the way that I've been introduced to Nietzsche's work in that specific instance. So there's a huge tension there between the Buddha on one hand, having the goal to be non-return to this world, and Nietzsche having the goal to be eternal return. We continue. Further, there's another interestingly translated passage here, which it's translated as, I proclaim, friend, says the Buddha, that in this fathom-sized, feeling-afflicted ascetic's body dwell the world, the origin of the world, the annulment of the world, and the path that leads to the annulment of the world. So if you've been watching these videos all year, you're probably familiar that that's sort of a take on the Four Noble Truths. Instead of the word, like, I'm I'm guessing the word dukkha here is translated as world instead of suffering or unsatisfactoriness. So we have the existence of the world. And I love that he refers to himself as his fathom-sized, feeling-afflicted ascetic's body. And another, Kaufman and Buber don't cite where Buber gets these quotes from in the Pali Canon, which it would be cool to go back and look at how they are otherwise translated directly to English. So in the Buddha's body dwells the world or suffering, the origin, right, the second noble truth, the annulment or the cessation is the word that we usually use in English, of the world or suffering, and the path that leads to the annulment of the world. Just there's another dimension added there with when we see these translations. I would love to see the notes of how, like, if the steps that I think were taken to get there. And Buber concludes his book thus. He says, history is a mysterious approach to closeness. And again, the whole book, I and Thou, is about how are we relating to the world and each other. Is it I, it, or I, you? History is a mysterious approach to closeness. Approach to closeness, not closeness. Every spiral of its path leads us into deeper corruption and at the same time into more fundamental return. But the God side of the event, whose world side is called return, is called redemption. So that maybe speaks to return and not return again. Thus concludes I and Thou. Super dense. I mean, we didn't do a ton of video on this. There's a lot of, it's very philosophical, especially in the Western tradition. It reads like a book from the Western canon, which it is. And that's a large difference from the other books we've been reading this year. I still do appreciate the crossover, especially the explicit crossover into Buddhism. That said, it was tough to read through this. I'm kind of glad that it was relatively short, only like 170 pages. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time.